Most writers are breaking David Foster Wallace's first rule for writing every single time they sit down and write. And I know 12 years ago, when I first heard about this rule from Wallace, I was very conflicted about it. I didn't want to believe it was true. And even though I've now integrated it into my soul, sometimes I reject it. Sometimes my ego gets in the way and I'm like, man, no, this is not correct. I am the exception. I am the anomaly. But unfortunately, everybody, you and I are probably not the anomaly that can get away with this. So in today's video, we're going to go over this rule and talk about how you guys can implement it in your life. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to David Foster Wallace on YouTube. We already have a massive playlist of videos, so you can go check out those check those out, down below. And let's hop into the quote. The most important thing for them to remember is that someone who is not them and cannot read their mind is going to have to read this. In order to write effectively, you don't pretend it's a letter to some individual, but you never forget that what you are engaged in is a communication to another human being. The bromide associated with this is that the reader cannot read your mind. The reader cannot read your mind. That would be the biggest one. Okay, everybody, repeat after me. The reader cannot read your mind. And so, what that can translate to is that you're not totally writing for yourself. You are writing for the audience. You need to have the audience in mind as you are writing. This isn't a personal exploration of your own artistic talent and beauty, because we are talking about fiction right now. If you want to go and follow your muse and do inspirational oriented stuff where you just do a first draft and don't really think about anything else, go do some poetry. That's what kind of the poetic field is about at some level, and there's space for that over there. But when you are asking someone to read your fiction, when, for instance, Neil Stephenson asked me to read Cryptonomicon, he is saying, okay, hey, Ian, I need you to give up 7, 8, 9 hours of your time, and you're going to need to trust me. And there are going to be times where you're going to be going on a journey, but from moment one of this book, and what most great authors do, they make you trust them, they connect with you, and then maybe they go into later on some of their own personal explorations. Why do you think David Foster Wallace in Infinite Jest put 2 of the easiest chapters of the entire novel at the front? And no real spoilers here, but the scene with Hal and Ken are very easily read. And that's why people probably gain the confidence to be like, man, this is really easy. I can finish the book. And then they get slammed in the face in some of the following chapters in terms of difficulty and whatnot. And so let's walk through this now step by step. The first thing that Wallace said is that the reader cannot read your mind. And so this is where transition sentences, making sure that everything flows easily and you're not doing character jumps or setting jumps or time jumps without proper information or help. That's where this all comes into play. And if you've never had an editor before, if you've never had kind of a large group of people read your work, then a lot of the times you think that your audience understands what's going on. Because when you think about who's going to read your book, it may be a guy like me. It may be some person who loves literature and is going and can easily digest the difficulty of the book, and that's not going to be a problem. But how am I going to digest it? I work 60 hours a week. I do all this. I do a bunch of other things. And so when I am reading, and especially if I'm going to be reading some new random author, it's probably going to be at a weird time where I'm like, okay, let's give this a try. I'm not going to be 100% focused. I'm not going to be all the way there. And I also don't trust you yet necessarily. And so if you don't have the reader in mind, if you're not sitting there at your desk worrying like, how are they going to react to this? How am I going to rope them in? Almost like YouTube videos. They're going to be a hook. How's the thumbnail? How's the title? It's the same thing in writing. You're doing the same exact game because you're dealing with people's emotions and their minds. And if you guys have not already gotten my free ebook on David Foster Wallace's favorite books, you need to go click that link in the description below, because in it, I include his favorite books on writing, the 3 books he always writes with on his table while drafting, while revising, and then some of his other favorite fiction books. And if you download it now, in the next week or so, I'm actually going to also send you my revised edition of this PDF that includes over 500 books. I've been doing research and grinding it out, and it's going to be the ultimate resource on Wallace's favorite works in a format that's technically less entertaining than something like this video. Right now, you could have this in your pocket and be taking a walk or like doing multitasking or stuff like that. But if you want to lug around Cryptonomicon with you and then open it up and start reading, you're going to have almost your full attention on it. You're not going to be able to be multitasking and cleaning as you're reading. And so the reader like me is kind of at the top nexus in terms of who's going to give your book a try. But what about the actual average median reader of your work? Most likely they've read some literary fiction before, but they prefer good stories. They prefer something that doesn't have to make them work too hard. There's only a crazy few, and I know we're part of the crazy few who like all these difficult works. But if you want to do a difficult work, like if you want to slide yourself into the slot of being the trippy guy who like does these crazy mind-bending novels, and you're competing with Pynchon and David Foster Wallace and all the best. And so it's going to be really hard, first of all, to get you published in that market. But even if you do, if you're not good enough, if you're not making the proper accommodations to the reader, then they're going to give up on you even more easily. And so most of you guys aren't trying to write these super complicated novels unless you're a beginner or have too much confidence, or if you're an advanced person, and that's fine. But most of us are just writing middle of the road novels. There's going to be some hard parts. It's not going to be a book talk book, but an average reader could get through it if they were motivated to do it. And so with your book, you are sending out this one-way channel of energy. You're not going to be able to correct anything, and they're going to have to get everything. They're going to have to understand the characters as deep as you understand them. And you want to evoke that feeling and that magic within them. And you're going to have to be sitting there. And this is something that you do in revision. When you're reading it again and again, you're not just seeing how it flows and how good it is. The magic of a sentence, the beauty of a sentence is how it feels to read it again for the first time. And that's what you're trying to do in revision, and actually why revision is somewhat interesting, because if you revise a sentence, you are seeing it for the first time, because the first time when you wrote it, you were in the creative process, but then when you reread it and it makes you feel good, you're like, damn, that's a good sentence. That's tapping into the reader's mind, especially if you're coming at it from a place of feeling. But if you're using only pure logic, and this is where kind of logic bros and people that can't tap into empathy, and this is why like a lot of engineers and stuff have to go to the science fiction genres and the fantasy genres, because over there in those genres, a lot of the time with these really complicated works, you see authors that aren't really necessarily writing for an audience. They're writing to build this world and build their creation. And so in genre work, you can kind of get away with this more. But in literary fiction, what I'm chasing is I'm a emotional junkie. I'm an entertainment junkie when it comes to books. I want to have my strings pulled and my mind blown and be at peace all at the same time, or at least within every single 100 pages. And so now knowing that, what have you done wrong? Tell me about the mistakes you've made with this in the past down in the comments below. I mean, I would say all young writers face this because, first of all, there's somewhat of an overconfidence when you're first putting yourself out there as a writer that, hey, that this is actually decent. I remember my first short stories. I think that professor's name, there was this professor named Christopher Perkins, and he was honestly pretty chill for the crap I was giving him in these creative writing workshops. But I want to almost puke when I look back at those stories because I was trying to make these huge metaphors without connecting it to everything. Just saying the name Crazy Horse, for instance, doesn't evoke anything in 99% of readers. No one's going to connect that to something important. And that's another thing to realize also is that most people aren't symbol literate. And so the symbols that you are putting into your work have to be there as unconscious things, and you can't expect people to actually be able to interpret them most of the time, unless they are like a very common symbol like the moon or the sun or even like a Greek god or something of that nature, or even colors. Like stuff like that can be processed pretty easily by people. But if you're doing more esoteric things like esoteric symbols or names or ideas, then you just have to assume that most people aren't going to get it and you're going to move on. I mean, when you look at, for instance, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, in there he uses at least 15 to 25 Gnostic words that are pretty esoteric that unless you've studied Gnosticism, you'd have no idea what they were. You're just like, oh, it's just Cormac using another crazy word. But kind of unconsciously with those things, he's kind of weaving in that this is somewhat biblical, that this is kind of epic and is dealing with the gods, because we understand the root of words unconsciously, and there's kind of this weird power of language that we can just interpret. And that's also just through like context clues and phonics and stuff. And so I wouldn't be scared. I wouldn't tell you guys not to include symbolism, but I would just say don't make these main more esoteric symbols a big part of the story, because people are going to miss that. Another thing that everyone should really get into is grammar and punctuation. You want your grammar and punctuation to be so good that you are seamlessly walking your reader through a work. And that is one of the core ways of keeping your reader in mind, is actually doing very good punctuation and developing your own system of it. Because if you're looking at a book, especially if you're self-publishing, Unfortunately, a lot of you guys out there are never going to get a book published by anyone, but you may be able to have a career as a self published author. And that's great. There's no better or worse. But if you're doing that and you can't necessarily afford an editor, or if you do, maybe it's just like a copy editor, you're going to have to come up with your own punctuation philosophy and why you do it, and have it be consistent mostly throughout the entire novel, or you're once again going to unconsciously start to trip up your reader. And a counterintuitive thing, though, about all this is that you don't want to kill your work. So here I am saying, worry about the reader, revise, feel all this. But at some point, you are, still beating a dead fish. Excuse me, beating a dead fish. And I am a huge believer in the creative muse, in that first inspiration, even with sentences, and that most of the time, the sentence that you are the revised sentence is going to be very similar, or just be a changing of the words or the addition of words from other sentences in the paragraph from that original muse. So if you sit down and you write like a page or two, then almost everything you need for the revision is already there. Nothing really needs to be changed, but maybe everything needs to be moved around a little bit with just some slight changing. That's how, in general, my work usually goes. Most of the time, the secrets and everything are already there. There just needs to be slight changes. So I'm not saying to you guys that you need to do what like a David Foster Wallace does and just like rewrite everything 30 times, because you really don't. And there are plenty of writers out there who are stuck in analysis paralysis, who never get anything out because they're just constantly reworking it and trying to make it better. When most of the time, if you're open and your creative channel is open, you're going to get something decent, because that's what's happening. When you open yourself up to the creative channel, not the logical channel. And what do I mean by this? Well, you could force a work of writing, right? You could be like, damn, I'm going to sit down right now. I'm going to write a book about a bunch of people. I have a piece of art about a saguaro cactus here. So, hey, a bunch of guys who steal saguaro cactuses in the black market saguaro cactus market. I could sit down over there and grind out a story on that right now and make it pretty damn good, I'm sure. But if I get another idea, like the other day I took a walk like really late at night. I had insomnia. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go take a walk. And there's like this little lake in my neighborhood. And I saw these weird people in hoods fishing at the lake at 2 a.m. They didn't look, they didn't turn. And I got inspired to do this story. So I came home and made some notes. And I basically, the next day, the first draft wrote itself. That wasn't forced at all. And it feels really good. And that story is going to be able to connect with people because it connected with me. And that story isn't some complicated mess of postmodernism or metafiction. And like, it's not going to require some crazy amount of revision. The power of most stories is from the original catalyst, and you don't want to ruin that very much. And that's not what I'm asking here. But as you're refining that, you do have to think, how can I transmute this idea to get it to these average readers? And some works require more than other works. A lot of you guys out there, especially with your novels, they're much more ambitious. A lot of our short stories in general, especially ones that are inspired like that require much less work. And so just keep that in mind. The bigger the creative channel and the bigger the muse, the less forcing you're doing, the less revision you are doing. That says something about being open, doing things like mindfulness and sleeping good and eating good, because that creative channel is going to be more open if you're not just living this like super crappy lifestyle. So thank you guys for being here. Let me know if you guys follow this rule, what you guys disagree with, how this has changed your life if you did start following this rule. And I'll see you guys in the next video on David Foster Wallace's writing philosophy. Peace.